You can watch the best parts of this series at MedCircle.com. Do you know someone who is controlling, overly focused on details, or closed off to new perspectives or ways of doing things? They may have obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD, which is often confused with, but much different than, the better-known condition, OCD. Welcome to the MedCircle original series, OCPD, coexisting with the perfectionist and coping with control. Dr. Ramani, thanks for being back with us.
Hello, Colin. Hello, Callie.
It is so special when you walk through that door to me, because I just go, yes! Like, we're going to learn something, we're going to make our lives better, we're going to get an education, and let's start with OCPD. What is that?
Okay, OCPD, like you said, probably one of the most misunderstood of all of the personality disorders, largely because the name is so similar to a very commonly discussed mental disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. OCPD stands for obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Honestly, it's a very different animal. So it's a pattern of, a chronic pattern, a chronic maladaptive pattern of orderliness, perfectionism, control, mental control, emotional control, environmental control, and an over-focus on details. There's also a real rigidity to it, a moral rigidity, a financial rigidity. These are folks who are not open to any kinds of new perspectives, new ways of doing things. They lack flexibility. They're very inefficient. And that's an interesting kind of, we'll talk about it. It's an interesting thing. They look efficient to the world because everything's so orderly, but in fact, they're really not. And they kind of lose the plot a little bit. They'll make lists, but they won't get things done. That's the inefficiency. So it's an interesting disorder because it's not an easy one to be in the presence of. Quite frankly, there's sort of a little bit of an antagonistic feel because they're so caught up in sort of the details. People with this pattern, people with this disorder often present as workaholics. If ever there was a place that the workaholics probably land in the sort of our diagnostic lexicon, it would be OCPD.
When you started explaining the traits, before you got to the rigidity and the orderliness that they enjoy, it sounded like a lot like a narcissist.
Well, you're bringing up something very interesting here and it's not talked about it a lot, but because there's such a focus on control in these folks, control of the environment, control of other people, control of the rules, they're very control-y, as it were. Control is a huge part of the dynamic in narcissism. The other piece is that they're so focused on the orderliness and the control that they'll favor that over the needs of the people around them. That can definitely be experienced by those other people as a lack of empathy. The best example I could give is that, let's say you're told dinner is at 6, and you had a little bit of a late meeting, and then you had a sick child, and then you were running late in traffic, and you end up, and you even text and say, listen, I'm going to be a little late, and you show up at 6:25. The OCPD host will say, I said 6, dinner's done.
So they don't even hide it.
Oh, heck
hide
no.
Their feelings.
Which is very interesting. They can feel very cold. They can feel very cold, very clipped, and it's this sense of, I think people don't know what to do with it because most of us are a little bit sloppy. Life is messy.
Right.
And so they're more concerned with having a white sofa and having plastic covers on it than having their grandchildren over.
I get it. Why then is this related to OCD?
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. And in fact, this is a very fine teaching point I end up having to make with my students, and they always get it wrong on the exam.
Listen up, students.
Students, come on. But here's the difference. There's some common top notes in the sense that there is a sense of trying to control things. There is probably a little anxiety in both disorders, but honestly, that's about where it begins and ends. One key difference, and I'm going to use a term that feels very technical, but then I'm going to make it very familiar. There's a term we use called egosyntonic. A little bit of an old school term. What egosyntonic means is when symptoms or patterns are kind of consistent with who we are. We're actually kind of okay with it, okay? People with OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, not egosyntonic,
No.
very uncomfortable.
That's right.
The obsessions are very intrusive, very anxiety producing. The compulsions, they even know in many cases, this is a waste of time. I'm not fitting in with people. This is ruining my life. OCPD, different game. Very egosyntonic. That they're like, this is who I am. Look at my clean house. Look at my clean schedule. Look at how everything's so orderly. Everything in my refrigerator is labeled. It's that kind of a situation. And these are the rules. And this is what I believe. And either you believe it or bye-bye. So they're actually kind of like, they sort of run a very clear, it's almost like a dictatorship.
Yes.
They're very clear on how it is.
So these
there's
people
a
are
huge
not
difference.
seeking out therapy then very often.
Not as a rule, no. In fact, where you might see them is when I reflect on the times I've worked with clients with this pattern, it was either kind of embedded in more of a narcissistic picture, or they were struggling with another clinical issue like anxiety or like major depressive disorder. So I was managing that issue, and then I was starting to see this sort of rigidity kind of come up. I'm not really a good rigid person's therapist, so I think that a lot of folks would probably kind of go away. There's something, I don't know, you feel like you're kind of sitting in a living room with me, so I have a different feel. There are therapists out there that sort of do well with this and may even resonate with it a little bit more, but I'm not your gal, so I'm not going to see it that much.
So why do you think there aren't more people who are aware of OCPD?
First of all, and the patterns we see in OCPD, perfectionism, orderliness, control, strangely, they're patterns society kind of values, right?
Point.
Like closet porn. Or refrigerator porn, like you walk,
At first I go, what is closet porn? Now I understand, like when everything's really
like,
organized.
Everything's organized and labeled.
Right.
And there's entire YouTube channels devoted to that kind of thing. And we take photographs and we think, I want all my shoes alphabetized, so there is this sense that when you are orderly, there's a virtue there. The person whose car is so neat and clean and gets detailed regularly and has the schedule color-coded on the wall, these are viewed as almost virtues. We don't tend to look at sloppy people and say, you go. We're like, get it together.
Well, those are looked at as virtues, and I would still look at those as virtues, but if that person is lashing out at people for
but that's where it's a subtle point. They're not lashing out.
Okay.
If I say to you, you show up to my house at 6:25 and I said, Kyle, dinner was at 6. Dinner's done.
Yeah, I would never come to dinner again.
No. And it's already been put away. Like, those dishes are washed.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if somebody said that to me, I'd go, ugh, gross. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah, and but the thing is, though, what many people would do is say, I'm so sorry. And they'd be very apologetic. And it sets into place a very uncomfortable dance. And so, nobody's going to say, get combative with somebody. They were, in fact, late.
Right.
There's a real moralistic overtone to this pattern, too. If you do one misstep that they don't agree with, like, I don't know, let's say you, you find an extra movie ticket on the ground and you're like, let's just do it here. And they'll say, hello, this is a rule. You're stealing from the multiplex. I'm not comfortable, or even worse. This is one thing I have seen. They will have very, very moralistically rigid rules about things all of us struggle with, like things like infidelity, or even in their own friends. And I remember once, I heard this more conversationally, it made me think on this, that somebody knew their friend was quite rigid. Then the person who was sharing the story said, listen, I had a sloppy night in Vegas. I did. And I was probably the woman who was telling the story was married, and I was probably a little bit more flirty than I should have been with this guy. Nothing untoward. But the very rigid friend noted it and said, I'm not friends with cheaters. Friendship done. Like, they will dismiss people who are not in line with what they believe to be right and wrong. And they don't tend to have that open and flexible personality style to try new things, new experiences. They'll go on vacation to the same place every single year. Yeah. They're not going to try, they're not going to be open to new perspectives.
Are they predictable?
Very predictable. Not in a nice way, but very predictable.
But we know what's likely going to happen.
Yeah.
What are some misconceptions about people with OCPD?
Well, here's an interesting observation. I was thinking about that when I was driving over to this shoot, is that a lot of people, like, let's say your car is super clean and you're like, don't put your soda can in my car, or something like that. You might say, oh, you're so OCD. They're talking about this. We're using these terms, and sometimes we sort of bandy around some of these mental health terms. This is what people are talking about, that really rigid, really controlled and controlling person, controlling their space, controlling their environment, the labeled refrigerator, the hyper-organized closet. That's not to say all organized people are like this. I don't want people to say, oh my God, I have a really organized closet, I have this issue. No, because this person may also be very open and flexible, and it's fine if you show up at 6:30. They'll be fine with those other kinds of things. They won't be antagonistic in that way. They won't be so controlling over everything that they can't let in they can't be flexible. Sometimes you miss the flight.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're late, and to be able to cope with that.
I understand all of that, and the point I am unclear on, though, is because this is a disorder, it has to negatively impact their life.
Yes, and there you highlight the biggest struggle we have throughout the whole personality disorder lexicon in any diagnostic manual, is that the pattern has to be causing social and or occupational impairment or marked impairment or distress, which is a fancy way of saying the person's uncomfortable with this pattern. And so you're not going to find a lot of people who are going to show up with this unless they may come into therapy and say, you know what, my partner and I, my husband and I, my wife and I, we keep fighting because I need things to be a certain way. And I can't let go of this, but I guess if I don't let go of this, we're done.
Right. So what about the people who are living with someone with OCPD or know somebody who has that? What will they get out of this series that will benefit their lives?
I'm hoping that people who watch this series will sort of understand this is an interesting, kind of octopus-like pattern, because it doesn't just go down that one path of control. It takes in some other territory, like this inefficiency, this inflexibility, this rigidity. So while it all clusters together, it does go in different directions. To understand sort of how wide this pattern is. This isn't just about the organized closet. So before people want to throw the label out, to understand it takes in more territory than you think. That to understand that it doesn't feel good, and it's okay to get frustrated, that this may feel uncomfortable. Some workarounds, for how to deal with this. This is not an easy pattern to coexist with if you're not like this also. And might even help people understand, for example, why this person and this pattern is causing lots of rifts, for example, in this person's extended family. It might be turning holidays or birthdays into a nightmare. It might be even causing, interestingly, for how efficient these people look, they're not.
Yes.
And it could be making it difficult for them to keep a job, or it's causing workplace strife. So it might help people understand how all of these patterns play out in people who, at the face of it, may just look like they're very buttoned up, very rigid, very controlled, very tidy, but there's a bit more than that. And to distinguish it from OCD, which is an entirely different phenomenon.
We have a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
We better get to it. As a MedCircle member, you can access this entire series on OCPD. You can also access the series on OCD. That will give you the exact education you need to make those differentiations. I'm Kyle Kittleson, and remember, whatever you're going through, you got this. Thanks for watching. Your next step is to go to MedCircle.com and finish watching this series. There you can also access other series and get actionable advice and simple explanations. Continue your mental health journey at MedCircle.com, and I'll see you there.